It's really amazing how fast a drug can go from like, just being this thing you read about in a medical journal to suddenly being everywhere. Everyone's talking about it.
Right.
Like take Ozempic, for instance.
Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago that, well, I mean, it was basically just doctors who even knew what it was. And now it seems like everyone's heard of it, probably because of all the stories about people losing a lot of weight.
Uh-huh.
Which actually is exactly what we're going to be digging into today for you, the listener.
Yeah, we're doing a deep dive into this whole Ozempic phenomenon and really getting into semaglutide,
Which is
the active ingredient in it, and just all of its effects, both on weight management and also type 2 diabetes.
So if you're listening to this right now and you want to, you're interested in like really understanding what this is all about.
Yeah.
But you don't want to get lost in all the super technical details and stuff. We're going to try to break it all down for you.
Yeah.
We've got a bunch of info to go through, including some excerpts from a piece called The Ozempic Phenomenon, a deep dive into semaglutide and the shifting landscape of weight management.
Yes.
And then also we're looking at some relevant academic research and data from the FDA.
That's right.
So basically what we're going to try to do here is extract like the most important things that you need to know about semaglutide, how it works, what its benefits are, the challenges that come with using it, and then also some of the really like interesting societal stuff that it's bringing up.
Yeah, the ripple effects, it's very interesting.
Right, exactly.
Big questions it raises.
So I think it's interesting, like thinking about how this all started. It's not like Ozempic was always meant to be for weight loss.
Right.
It kind of started in a totally different area of medicine.
That's absolutely correct.
Right.
It was actually developed and approved for the treatment of type 2 diabetes.
Oh, okay.
So its active ingredient, semaglutide, belongs to this class of drugs called glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonists, or GLP-1 receptor agonists for short.
GLP-1 receptor agonist.
That's the lingo.
Okay, so like zoom in on that for a second.
Okay.
What exactly is GLP-1? And how does semaglutide like fit into that whole thing?
So GLP-1 is a hormone that our bodies actually produce naturally in the gut, and it happens when we eat. One of its main jobs is to help regulate blood sugar levels.
Okay.
And how it does that is it stimulates the pancreas to release insulin, which helps to lower blood glucose, and it also suppresses the release of glucagon.
Interesting.
Which is another hormone that raises blood sugar.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a balancing act.
So semaglutide basically is kind of doing what GLP-1 does in the body.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's designed to bind to and activate those same receptors as the natural GLP-1.
Okay.
And when it does that, it leads to more insulin being secreted and less glucagon being released.
Got it.
Which is really helpful for people with type 2 diabetes because often they have disruptions in these processes.
And I remember reading that earlier versions of these GLP-1 drugs had to be injected more often.
Right.
Like maybe every day or something.
Yeah.
But what's different about semaglutide?
That's a really key difference. Semaglutide lasts longer in the body.
Okay.
Compared to those earlier GLP-1 receptor agonists.
Right.
It has a longer, what we call half-life.
Okay.
Which means it stays active for longer.
Got it.
And you can take it or inject it only once a week.
Wow. Okay, so it's much more convenient.
Much more convenient. And it's also been proven to be really effective at lowering HbA1c.
Right.
Which
is like the measure of your blood sugar control over time.
Exactly. Yeah, long-term blood sugar control.
Okay.
So this combo of being convenient and effective has made it super valuable for managing type 2 diabetes.
So it sounds like it's done its job well as a diabetes drug.
Yes.
But then kind of out of the blue came this weight loss. It was almost like an accident, right?
But in a way, it was an unexpected but very welcome side effect that came out of those initial diabetes trials.
Right.
Researchers were focusing on blood sugar control in people with type 2.
Got it.
But then they saw that the people taking semaglutide were also losing a good amount of weight.
Okay.
And it wasn't totally shocking because we knew that GLP-1 had effects beyond just blood sugar, especially in the brain.
Okay, yeah. And this is where it starts to get like really interesting to me.
Yeah.
How does a hormone that's, mainly dealing with blood sugar end up making people lose so much weight?
So as we were talking about earlier, those GLP-1 receptors, they aren't just in the pancreas. They're also in different parts of the brain, including this part called the hypothalamus.
The hypothalamus.
Which is basically the control center for things like, your appetite and feeling what we call satiety. And when semaglutide activates those GLP-1 receptors in the hypothalamus, it basically makes those feelings of fullness stronger.
Oh, okay. So people basically feel satisfied sooner and they end up eating less?
Exactly. That's one part of it.
Okay.
The other thing it does is it slows down how quickly your stomach empties.
Oh, yeah.
So the food stays in your stomach for longer.
Got it.
And that also contributes to feeling full for a longer time.
Interesting.
So it's really like a double whammy, for reducing calorie intake.
And this wasn't just like, people losing a couple pounds.
No.
Right. Like the weight loss was pretty significant, wasn't it?
It's substantial, yeah.
I think I read about some studies that had really, big percentages.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They did these trials called the STEP trials.
STEP trials.
Which stands for semaglutide treatment effect in people with obesity.
Okay.
And they specifically looked at how well semaglutide worked for weight loss in people who had obesity or who were overweight, whether or not they also had type 2 diabetes.
Okay.
And the results were, they were pretty impressive.
Yeah.
The average weight reduction was something like 15 to 20%.
Wow.
The person's starting weight.
So that's like, to put that in perspective, that's as much weight loss as you'd see with some types of bariatric surgery.
That's right.
Right. That's huge.
It's significant. Yeah.
But it also kind of, reminds us that obesity is a really complicated health problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not just about, eating too much or not exercising enough.
Right.
There's so much more to it.
Like what kind of things?
Well, there's genetics, there's environmental factors, how you behave, even things like socioeconomic factors.
Right.
It's a really complex interplay of all these different things.
So we've been focusing on lifestyle, like changing how we eat and how much we exercise.
Right. And those are super important for overall health. Yeah. But the reality is those can be really hard for people to stick to, in the long run.
For sure.
And they don't always give you the results you want, even if you can stick to them.
Right.
So semaglutide is kind of offering a new way to tackle this complex issue.
But it's not perfect, right? There are like side effects and things to be aware of, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's not a magic bullet, unfortunately. There are potential downsides. And I think the most common side effects, especially when you first start taking it, are things like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, those sorts of...
Got it. GI issues.
And so what about like using it for a really long time?
That's a really important question.
Yeah.
Because we know it works in the short and maybe medium term.
Right.
But we don't have a ton of data yet on what happens when people use it for years and years.
Oh, okay.
So that's something that researchers are still studying.
Yeah.
Are there any long-term risks? We just need more time to figure that out.
And then I guess there's also the whole issue of cost.
It's not exactly cheap.
Yeah. No, it can be very expensive.
And so that kind of makes you think, well, who can actually afford this treatment?
That's a really crucial point because when something is this effective, but it costs a lot, it can end up making existing health disparities even worse.
Right.
Yeah.
Because not everyone has access to it.
Exactly.
And it kind of brings us to some of the bigger societal questions that have come up around Ozempic. It's not just a medical thing anymore.
It's become much more than that.
It feels like it's sparking some pretty deep conversations.
It really is. It's getting into some really interesting territory.
So, what are some of the things people are talking about?
Well, one concern is that, having this drug available might make people rely too much on medication and maybe not focus enough on those lifestyle changes that are still so important, like diet and exercise.
Yeah.
It's kind of tempting to think, oh, I can just take this shot once a week.
Right. And then I don't have to worry about what I eat.
Exactly.
Right.
But we know that health is about more than just weight.
Right. It's a whole picture.
It's a whole package.
And so I guess using a drug to manage weight also makes us think about, how society views weight in the first place.
That's a really interesting point.
Does it kind of reinforce the idea that this is just a medical problem?
It could.
And that we need a medical solution.
Yeah, and it might make us overlook all those other things that influence body weight, like social and environmental factors.
And then there's also the whole body image thing. If these drugs become really common,
right,
could that like put even more pressure on people to look a certain way.
Potentially, yeah.
Like what's considered a normal weight
right.
could shift.
That's a really good point. It could definitely affect our perceptions.
And then I've heard about people using Ozempic even though they don't have diabetes.
Right.
And they're not even like super overweight.
Right. Yeah, that's what we call off-label use.
Right.
And it's adding another layer of complexity to all of this.
Like how so?
Well, it can make it harder for people who actually need the medication for medical reasons to get it.
Okay, yeah, like people with diabetes.
Exactly.
Who rely on it to manage their blood sugar.
Yeah, and we saw that happen recently with those Ozempic shortages.
Right.
People with type 2 diabetes were having a hard time filling their prescriptions.
Wow, yeah, that's a big problem.
Because the demand for weight loss was so high.
Right, so it's kind of highlighting how we need to figure out how to distribute these drugs fairly.
Yeah, it's a real challenge.
And make sure that people who really need them can get them.
Absolutely.
So, okay, we've talked about how semaglutide started as a diabetes treatment. Then we got into those surprising weight loss effects.
All right.
And all the complexities around obesity.
Yes.
And these big societal questions it's raising.
It's a lot to think about.
It's a lot to think about. So where do we go from here?
Right.
What does the future of weight management look like, given that semaglutide is now on the scene?
Well, I think there's no question that semaglutide is a major breakthrough in the treatment of obesity.
Yeah.
I mean, it's shown us a level of effectiveness that we haven't really seen before with other drugs.
Right.
And looking ahead, there's a lot of research going on right now, looking at whether we can combine GLP-1 receptor agonists like semaglutide with other medications that target different things involved in weight and metabolism.
So like combination therapies.
Exactly. Yeah. The idea is to maybe get even better weight loss.
Wow.
And improvements in metabolic health overall.
And I'm sure there's still a lot of research going on to figure out, the long-term impacts of these drugs.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really important.
To make sure they're safe to use for a long time.
Exactly.
So it seems like semaglutide, which is an Ozempic, has really become this powerful tool, not only for managing type 2 diabetes, but also for helping people lose a significant amount of weight.
It really has.
But it's clearly not a simple thing.
It's not a quick fix, no.
No, right. We have to think about all those complexities around obesity.
Yeah.
Like the side effects, how much it costs.
For sure.
Who has access to it.
Absolutely.
And then all these bigger societal conversations it's starting.
Those are crucial.
Yeah.
It's really important to have those conversations.
So it sounds like the future of weight management is going to be more personalized.
I think so, yeah.
Right. With, medications like these. But hopefully it's part of like a bigger plan that's really tailored to each person.
That's exactly right.
So I guess the big question for you, the listener, is, with all these changes happening.
Yeah.
And all this new technology coming out.
Right.
What do you think is the most important thing for us to consider as we, move into this new era of weight management? And what are some of those long-term consequences that we might not even be thinking about yet?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Because it really is about like balancing individual choices.
Right.
With public health and all these new medical possibilities.
Absolutely. It's a lot to consider.
Yeah, definitely a lot to think about.
A lot to ponder.
For sure. Lots to ponder.